Okay, so we're talking about file permissions, right? Because in Linux that exists. You know, it's what allows you to work with files and other users in your system to work with files. File permissions are a thing in Linux because Linux by design, as any Unix operating system is a multi-user operating system. It was designed from the beginning to be able to be used by multiple people from the get-go. Because of that, the simplest form of permission, the simplest form of security that Linux has is file permissions. That doesn't mean that's the only form of security that you should implement if you're a Linux system administrator, but it is the most basic form of permissions and the one that we're gonna introduce you to in this class. Later on in your IT career, when you get to take a more advanced Linux or system administration course, you will explore something called SE Linux, and other advanced security methods that the Linux system provides. But for now, since this is a basic introduction to Linux, you should know what file permissions are, why they exist, how they operate, and which commands do we use to manage them. Okay, so let's talk about file ownership. So a file can be owned only by one user and by one group. Put that in the top of your head. A file can only be owned by one group and one person at a time. That's it. It cannot be owned by multiple people and by multiple groups. Only one group can own a file at a time and one person can own a file at a time. If you want to see the permissions on a file and you want to see who owns it, you use which command? Which command do you use to see who owns a file and what permissions it has?
ls minus L.
Great. A long listing of the file will give you that information. There is another command that we can use for that. Who can tell me which command it is? Actually, there are two more commands that you can use for that you learn in my class that allows you to see the permissions in a file. Who can tell me? As a matter of fact, I'll give you 5 seconds if somebody can give me one command, and I'm gonna give you 2 points for your midterm. Let me see.
Minus A.
Minus what?
Is it minus A?
No, I'm not talking. I'm not talking about arguments. Talking about the commands. There are two more programs that can be used to view the permissions on a file. One, two, three, 4, 5. You lose those 2 points. The command exa that you use, that you installed in one of your labs allows you to list directories, doesn't it? And files, right? Didn't you remember this command? There is another command. There is another command. The tree command. And both of those commands allow you to see the file permissions, and it allows you to see also, who owns the file. Remember, if you don't, I suggest you to go start practicing because you're gonna need it for your midterm. Okay. Any questions? Let's move on. Okay, if you want to see a list of your users in a Linux system and a list of your groups, there are two files respectively that you can use. File 1, the password file. File 2, the group file. The password file for users, the group file for groups. The command that we use for changing the ownership of a file or directory is the chown or chown command. How do you use it? Very simple. Chown because that's the command. The user that you're going to assign the ownership of a file or directory, colon, and then the group, and then the name of the file. For example, John file.txt is going to change the ownership of the file.txt of whoever owns it now to John. If you provide the colon, and then after the colon you provide a group name, it will only change the group who owns the file. For instance, the file.txt is owned by whoever right now, but after I run that command, it's going to be owned by the marketing group. If you want to change both the group and the owner, you can simply put the name of the owner, colon, and the name of the group, and then the file. And that will change both the owner and the group. Questions about the chown command or chown? Perfect. Okay, do you remember the output of the ls-l command? When we talk about permissions, this is what we're talking about. These three letters over here. Now, R means read, W means write, and X means execute. Permissions are assigned in a triplet format: read, write, and execute. The first triplets represents the user. The second represents the group. And the third represents other. Now, who is other? Anybody else who's not the group or the user. For example, a web server, right, might have different groups like the marketing group, the HR group, the IT administrator group, and the programmers group, right? Because a lot of people access that particular server. If you have a file that is owned by the IT department and is owned by the user John, everybody else who is not in the IT department and who is not John belongs to the other category for that particular file. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sí.
Perfect. Do you see that letter D at the beginning?
Yeah.
That indicates that that particular file is a directory. If you see a hyphen there, it means that that particular file is a file. What happens if you see a letter L there? What does it mean? I don't expect you to remember that, by the way. But let me see if somebody does.
Longer.
If you see a letter L at the beginning of the entry, what do you think it means? 2 points for the midterm to whoever that can figure that out in the next 5 seconds. That means it is a symbolic link. If you see a L at the beginning, it means it's a symbolic link. Do you remember that when we were doing managing files and directories, and we were talking about creating links that are literally shortcuts to get to the other file? We said that if you want to see if a file is a symbolic link, you can do the ls-l command, and it will show you the file and where it points to. Okay, let's move along. The permissions in files and directories are different, right? They mean different things. Read means different when you're talking about a file than when you're talking about a directory. Now, let's explore the files first. So when you're talking about files, read means that the user can open the file and see what's inside. Write means that the user can literally type more into the file. X or execute means that the user, right, the person who's going to access the file can run that file as a program. Any questions about that?
No.
Now, directories mean something different. When you're talking about I have read permission to the downloads directory, you're saying I can list the content of that directory. I can see what's inside that directory because I have read permission to that directory. Write permission means that you can create subdirectories in the given directory. You can work on that directory. You can create more stuff in it. You can create files in that directory because you have write permission to that directory. Execute means that you can open the directory. You can go into the directory, right? Like using the CD command to go inside the directory or double clicking on the directory and seeing it open. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions so far? Am I going too fast?
No.
A little bit, but it's fine.
Okay, perfect. Don't forget that you are the one paying and you're the one responsible for slowing me down, asking questions. I'm the one getting paid, so puts the burden on you. Let's move along. So, like I said before, a hyphen represents that the permission hasn't been granted. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means the following. Oh, I forgot to connect my writing display today, so what can be done? We're gonna work without it today. Now, notice that the user over here has read, write, and it has a hyphen for the execute permission. This means that the user does not have permissions to run the file as a script. Notice that you have 2 hyphens over here for the group, representing that the group doesn't have write permission and it doesn't have execute permission. What does this mean? It means that Martin can add text to this file, but other people that are inside the users directory, like Maria, she won't be able to write to the file, but she will be able to see what's inside the file. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Perfect.
so
Go
like RW, right? I mean, excluding the R on the left, all the way on the left, the W does mean she can write.
She can write, exactly. That means she will be able to write to the file, but she won't be able to read it.
Okay.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. In which scenario will it make sense to allow a user to write to a file but not read the file?
computer code.
Perfect. Maybe you have some computer code that you don't want people to read, but you want them to be able to provide feedback into the file, like, maybe add this line of code over here. Another example, you have a general file where you put logs in there, right? You want to be able to allow users and applications to write logs into the file, but you don't want users to be able to see every single log that has been entered in the file because you want to be the only person to read the logs. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so far.
Okay, let's move along. Now, which command do we use to change the permissions on a file? Because permissions are not static, we might need to modify them to fit our particular need. For that, we use the chmod or the change mode command. And the syntax for this command is crazy stupid. Say change mode, the permission that you want the file to have, and then the file or the group of files. The file can be provided as an absolute path or a relative path, or just simply the file name if you happen to be working in the directory where the file exists. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, there are two ways that you can write permissions in Linux. You can use symbolic notation or numeric notation, right? So learn whichever way you want. It doesn't matter. They do the same. Some people find symbolic notation super easy. Other people find that really hard. Some people find numeric notation to be super easy. Other people find that almost impossible to use. I use a combination of both because I know them both. But it's going to take a while for you to know them both. So I suggest stick to the one that you find the easiest to learn. And then over time, you might want to explore the other ones. Depending on how I'm modifying the permission, I use one method over the other. Because sometimes one method is shorter than the other, while another method is just simply more efficient. Now, let's explore each and every one of them with the specific examples. I want to address first the symbolic notation mode, because I find that to be the easiest for students to understand, especially for people who are, starting their Linux journey now. Okay, so in a symbolic notation, permissions are applied using symbols. These symbols are letters. U represents the user. G represents the group, and O represents other. A represents all. Now, if you want to give permissions, right? If you want to add permission, we use plus, right? It's a mathematical expression plus. Like I want this file to have, I want the user to have execute permission in this file. I will do user plus X will give me execute permission in this particular file. If you want to remove, we can use the minus. And if you want to set the permissions, from the get-go, like, okay, I just want this user to have execute and read, we can use the equal sign to assign the permissions. Now, let's take a look at some examples of this, right? So I'm going to create a directory. And if you have a terminal in front of you, you can follow along with me. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm going to create a directory. I'm going to call this test dir, right? Test dir cd, test dir clear. And I'm going to create a file over here. If I want to create an empty file, what command should I use?
Touch.
What command?
Touch.
Touch. There you go. Touch. And then I'm going to call this file1. File1. I'm going to do ls minus l. And notice that this particular file has read and write permissions for my user, read and write a permission for my group, and then read permission for everyone else. Now, let's say that I want to modify the permission of this file so that I can execute this file. The first thing that I will do is type chmod and then user, because I want to modify the user's permission on the file, and I want to add permission, right? I don't want to subtract, I want to give it more power. Plus X will add the execute permission, and then file. Notice the color of the file. Look at the permissions now. The user can execute, while before the user couldn't execute. I can also subtract permission. I want to subtract the group's permission from writing. Group cannot write anymore. So I do the same thing. Chmod, G represents the group, minus W, so it's not gonna have write permission anymore, and then file. Press enter, and notice that it only has write permission. Read permission. The write permission has been stripped away for the group. Questions?
Yes, question. With the file owner group, now I'm basing this off the presentation because I see in Linux file permissions, there's file owner RWX, but on this one is -RWX. Is there a difference?
Sorry, I'm not quite getting your question. What do you mean exactly?
I think I'm confusing myself with the presentation and then your example, that's all.
Well, my example and the presentation examples are two different examples.
Yeah, so there you go.
Let's make even more examples, because as I give you examples, you're gonna understand this more, right? Okay, so let's create another file, right? Let's remove file 1, clear. I wanna create a file and I wanna add some text to the file. How can I do that?
Vim.
Vim,
Vim.
there you go, Vim, and I'm gonna call it file 2, and I'm gonna call this file2.sh. This is gonna be a shell script, right? This is called a shell declaration. Don't worry about what it means. When I get to shell scripting, I'll explain you that.
Wait, I'm sorry. What was the command? It was vim file 2.
I created a file using Vim. That's all I
Yeah,
did.
but what was the
I'm
extension?
not
What
gonna
kind
tell you the command. And I'm not
Okay.
gonna tell you the extension. I want you to let me finish first, because
sir.
I'm gonna do a couple of things and I want you to pay attention first. And then I'll give you the opportunity to try it all you want. Okay, so I'm creating a file, and all I'm gonna put in this file is echo hello world. The echo command is the equivalent of the print command in Python. It allows me to display text, right? And I'm gonna save the file. Now, the extension is .sh, by the way. Now, if I do an ls minus l over here, what permissions do I have to this file? What can the user do? And the user being me.
Read and write.
Read and write. It cannot execute, right? Okay, so
Yep.
what can the group do?
Right?
Read and write.
Read and write. What can others do?
Read.
Read.
Read. Okay, let's write that down. To LibreOffice Writer. Actually, no, let's open Genie. Right. Okay, so what you told me was that the user can read and write, but he cannot execute. The group can read and write, but he cannot execute. And others can read and not write and not execute. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna modify that. These are the current permissions. I want you to modify the permissions so that they are as following. I want the user to be able to read, write, and execute. I want the group to only be able to read, and I want others to not have permissions at all. Help me write this command. Obviously, the first thing that I'm gonna write is chmod. So sidebar, there you go. Chmod, right?
Can you do this all in one shot, or do you have to do it?
I'm getting there. The first thing that type is chmod, right? Because that's the command that I'm gonna use for this. Now, what permissions is the user going to have? RWX, right? Should I add, remove, or make it equals to something? Add. What do I add?
Just X?
Just X. There you go. Everybody who said just X is in the correct path. Why? Because it already has read and write. I'm only adding X. Perfect. Now, notice that I put a comma over here. And the reason why I put a comma is because I also want to modify the group. Okay. What permissions am I going to add or subtract to the group?
Minus W.
Minus
W.
Minus W, because it already has W and I want to get it to only read. Perfect. Notice I'm going to put another comma because I also want to modify the owner's permission, sorry, the other's permission, right? Okay, what permission is other going to have?
Minus R.
Minus R. Why? Because it only has R and I wanted to not have permissions at all. And then the last thing that I'm gonna provide to my command is the file whose permission we're modifying. And this is called file2.sh. Did it work?
So it did. It worked.
Shanik, does this answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Questions for me now.
Yeah, what's an absolute permission then? If you're adding and you're removing, what's absolute?
When we use the equal sign, you know, we are overriding everything that the file has. So user is gonna have read, write, and execute. The group is going to have read only. And others is gonna have, sorry, others is gonna have nothing.
Gotcha. Okay, I see now.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's why you use the equal sign for. Okay. Now this is symbolic notation. As you can see, symbolic notation is easier to understand. Well, I haven't shown you the other one, but you can see that there is a pattern here, right? I can just simply do plus or minus to whatever I want and modify it however I desire, right? Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm gonna give you a particular test, right? Let's practice a little bit. I'm gonna create a file. And I want you to write the following information for that file, right? I want the user to have no permissions at all. I want the group to have only read permission, and I want others to have write permission. Type in the comment section of the chat here in the chat of Zoom your answers.
Wait, Professor, what was the what did you want specifically again? I'm sorry.
Modify the permissions of file 3 so that they have these permissions over here. And this is the current permissions of file 3. Okay, Edwin and Jude, let's try your suggestion. Did it work?
No.
Why is it copying that? This is what you guys type, right?
Yes.
Did it work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Mohua, you have a typo on your command.
What, professor?
You have a typo in your command. That's not gonna work.
Oh, I have to put the equal sign. Oh, no, okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. No. I'm misreading. I'm misreading. You're fine. Because you are removing read and execute from others. Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. I see. Yeah.
Okay.
Shanik, your command is wrong because you're modifying all twice. You should put that together.
Can you? I didn't know if you could.
No, you have to put them together. Except it works in triplets, so you cannot add them in the same one. Okay, perfect. Seems that everybody got a hang of symbolic notation. Now let's talk about the other one, right? So when you talk about numeric notation, read, write, and execute has a numeric value. Read is equal to 4, write is equal to 2, and execute is equal to 1. And the combination of these three values is what gives each and every one of them their permissions, right? So how much is 4 plus 2?
6.
So 6 represents read and write permission. How much is 4 plus 1?
2.
4
5.
plus 1 is 2, 5.
5.
So 5 represents read and execute permission. How much is 2 plus 1?
3.
So 3 represents write and execute. And how much is 4 plus 2 plus 1?
7.
7, which gives full permission, meaning read, write, and execute. Now look at this command over here. The first number represents the permissions that you're giving the user. The second number represents the permissions that you're giving the group. And then the third number represents the permission that you're giving other. As you can see, numeric notation is faster to write, but it requires that you remember the value of these guys and then that you do the math. For instance, in this particular example over here, group number 6, right? Group has read and write permission. Other has also read and write permission, whereas the owner, right, the user has full permission. If you look at chmod 555, it means that for this particular file, the user, the group, and the other have only read and execute permission. Now, what does chmod 666 and then the file name represent? And it's not the number of the beast, no.
Read and write.
Read and write for everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving along, if I want to represent this permission over here in numeric, how can I do it?
0.
0, perfect. If I want to represent the group's permission for reading, right? Which number should I use?
4.
4.
Perfect. How about other?
Writing is 2.
2.
2, perfect. So 042 represents that the owner has 0 permission, the group has read permission, and others have only write permission. Full permission is 777, and it's very dangerous to use. I don't advise nobody who ever use 777 as any permission that you give to anything. And the reason why is because when you give other the permission to do whatever they want with the file, when a hacker gets into your system, they can do whatever they want to that file. Let's say a hacker broke into your web server because a particular application that creates a user in your system has a vulnerability that was exploited, and they were able to gain access via that vulnerability to your server. Any file that is owned by that particular user is now vulnerable because the user can do whatever the user wants with that file because he has full permission. Stay away from 777. Don't
Wait.
ever provide 777 permission to anything.
I'm sorry, what's the order in which like they represent?
User, group, and other.
All right, thanks.
Professor,
Yes.
what happens if you change the permissions while the file is in use?
It depends. Who's changing the permission? Can you modify it? For example, bin file to .sh. It's open right now, right? Now, if I want to prevent anybody from opening this file, from writing to this file, what permission should I give this file?
000.
No. 0.
Or
Thou won't give permission to
700.
700. Nobody has anything to do nothing. But I want the owner to be able to do something. I want the
700.
owner to be able to execute the file. What permission should I give?
1.
One.
One.
And now anybody else can do it. Nobody can do nothing to this file. The only thing is the owner can execute the file and that's it. I want you to see the whole command. I was able to change the permission, right? But I'm typing in here. I shouldn't be able to type, right?
But your typing is not. It's not gonna be saved.
It won't save it.
Now, it is the question. Exactly. There you go. Some people are understanding how this works. All the changes that you're editing to this file are not saved to the hard drive. They are saved to memory. You're working with the buffer. Right? Because the file is already open in memory. You're working with the file as it was when you open it from your hard drive. Right? Once you save the data to the file, that's a different story. What do you see there?
Read only.
File is read only. Because when you were going to save the changes to the hard drive, the permission have changed. And then, hey, Juanito, go get me some plátanos. You can do nothing over here. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
I have a
Yeah,
question.
thank you.
Yes.
So it says read only, but you gave a 0 as like non-permission. So when they exit.
I'm the owner.
Oh, okay.
When it exits,
No, I was talking about like the users or everybody else, but since I remember you're the owner, so.
yeah, but I can only have execute permission. I will never be able to save these changes. I can't save those changes. The only thing that I can do is do this. Run it. File 2. Yeah, it should be. Oh, wait, hold on. File 2.sh. Was that the right one? Yeah, that's the right one. Should be able to run it. I go back to that one. I should be able to run it with no problem. I go back to that one. Any more questions before I can continue here? Okay. Now, I gave you a little bit of practice over there. We don't have much time to practice because I want to talk about the midterm. So that's it. If you want a cheat sheet of file permissions, I made one for you. Just go to that URL.
Could you maybe link it in chat?
9JC. Oh my God. Yeah, I'll link it in the chat. There you go. It's just to help you remember. So it doesn't have any of the examples of the command because you have the particular formula over here. So, but if you want to add that, then you can add it yourself over here in this empty space. Just edit the picture. Okay, so with that said, I want to talk about the midterm. So first of all, let's talk about the format of the midterm. And I'm going to stop the recording over here.